be here with you. Awesome. I'm gonna start again. Since we're recording, it's a pleasure to be here with you all. And it's awesome that our resource programming is really focused on the real estate sector. But what I'm seeing is we have so many members and you're coming from all different worldviews, perspectives, and work days. And so we're going to make sure that we touch on this subject today in a broad-based way. Your questions that are specific to your work are really important, and we'll make sure that we keep some time there for that in the Q&A. So I'm the Executive Director of Plexus, LGBT and Allied Chamber of Commerce, and also our Education Foundation, and my pronouns are she, her. Dan, Jackie, and Aaron, thank you for being such amazing leaders on the Resource Task Force. It's a really amazing new program that we're able to launch because of your leadership. So just a bit about what we're going to go through today and how we're going to follow this conversation. I like to start my presentations with these One World posters. They're from an organization called Learning for Justice. We'll make sure that we include this in our follow-up, our emails. If you registered online, you'll be able to get links to the different resources that I share here today. What I really like about the One World resources, these posters, and what I want you to think about doing is how can you use posters, signage, stickers, name tags, rainbow pins, etc. How does that help you to express your allyship, or if you're a member of our community, LGBTQ and Q community, how does that help us improve communication and open up trust and conversation? But the main reason that I use this one is every time we are in this space of trying to learn more about the LGBTQ community or our work around equity and inclusion, I think that it's really important to approach this work and communication in general using the platinum rule. So many of us were raised with the golden rule. You know, you treat people the way that you want to be treated. But what this does is it centers our own perspective, our own lived reality in the center. It makes it the first part. But when we want to approach our relationships and even our understanding of different cultures in the world with more humility, with cultural humility, rather than just saying you check off a box and you get some kind of cultural competence, what we're doing there is using the platinum rule. We want to treat people, our clients, our colleagues, our family members, the way they wish to be treated. And that is really important when we're talking about things like gender identity and expression and using pronouns. In order to treat somebody the way that they want to be treated, we have to know them. We have to have a degree of humility, openness, and curiosity about how they've experienced the world and what works best for them to have the greatest sense of belonging and safety, right? When we think about cultural humility, also, it's not that you're thinking of yourself less, it's thinking, you're not thinking less of yourself, we're just thinking of maybe ourselves second, we're thinking of that other person. And that gets to this Kid President saying. Kid President is on YouTube from probably like 10 years ago when YouTube first started, if that's when it was. Always a good motivational speaker. But in this, we're being reminded that inherent to all of this is human dignity, right? Our awesomeness. I'm awesome, you're awesome. I don't have to have this all figured out. We're going to make mistakes along the way. But if I'm holding my innate human, value and dignity, and yours too, then we're going to get through this okay. Oh. There we go. I think my slide's advanced. Okay, awesome. So a bit about Plexus. I'm going to go through this pretty quickly. And hopefully that's the slide that you all are seeing, right, Aaron? Okay, great. Thanks, John. So we were formed in 2006 as a Chamber of Commerce, and then we added the Education Foundation in 2008 because we found that we were in the spaces starting to launch employee resource groups with major corporations like KeyBank and Progressive Insurance. And so we founded the Education Foundation to make sure that we had a commitment and mission to developing curriculum and educational programming focus on advocacy and LGBTQ inclusion, and then more broadly, just inclusion and belonging for everybody. We're really delighted that in this year, 2022, we were able to, under the Education Foundation, create the Resource Task Force. We're always looking to be responsive to the needs of our community and, of course, of our members. So many of you are members. We want to know the ways in which we can better serve you with events and programs. But also it's important, we're not a members only club. If you're a member, you get benefits like a directory listing or the ability to post jobs and come to events for free or for a discount, but we're always open to everyone. We just might make you pay for it. And then I would be remiss if I didn't welcome you and encourage you to join us on Thursday, April 14th. We have recently moved our offices here to the LGBT Center so we can have a greater degree of synergy and work with our colleagues here at the LGBT Center of Greater Cleveland, which puts us in the Gordon Square community. And so we're going to celebrate returning to in-person for our annual meeting by hosting over at our neighbor's house near West Theater. The annual meeting is a really great way to hear what we accomplished last year and to better understand what's going forward for us in this coming year. We're also going to celebrate our longtime board member, Michelle Tamalo, as she retired from the board. Also, the thing is, Plexus networking is amazing. Whether you are coming from a larger corporation, you're an insurance agent, you're working for a small business or entrepreneur, it is one of the most affirming and welcoming places. You're going to have a good mix of business and social. Okay. With that, let's start talking about gender, right? So keep in mind that today we're going to do this in maybe about 30 minutes so that we have time for your questions. This is a real broad-based overview about certain things around gender identity and gender expression, also around using pronouns, and then in general, having a greater sense of awareness of different people's identities and lived experiences, and how to use some gender neutral language so that you can have more efficient and inclusive conversation. So when we're talking about gender, that's usually where pronouns come into play, right? Because it has to do with understanding, respecting, and properly engaging somebody around their gender identity. One thing I want to plug into your mind right now is a lot of us have used forms in which we check a box with Mr., Miss, or Mrs. So that connects over to gender identity, and that connects to pronouns. It's almost like sharing our pronouns. So where parts of this could feel uncomfortable or unfamiliar, just remember that you probably used some of these mechanics already in the English language specifically when you think about how we use those titles. So the gender binary is a social rule. It has nothing to do with biology or physiology, right? It's the rules that humans have made up over time and in different places and in different culture about what it is or what identities there are regarding gender. And the binary says that there's male and there's female, there's masculine and there's feminine, and that's it. Now, in your own experience, regardless of your gender identity or how you express yourself, I think that you can think about some ways that you ran up against these rules. Like, who is supposed to wear pink? And who's allowed to cry? Who's allowed to be angry or aggressive? These rules that we have and that we've all grown up with around being a boy or being a girl. And so you can probably think of your own experiences where maybe you've benefited, it's privileged you in a certain way, or maybe that kind of rule that you were raised with didn't cause any dissonance or tension. And then other times we can think about the ways that it limited us, it didn't fit, and maybe even it hurt us. What's most important about this is that this changes over time. I don't know anybody on here that is woman identified. I myself am, I'm a cisgender woman. I have pants on, like literally I'm wearing pants, and I probably would have been burned at the stake in the 1800s for doing that. So that changed over time what women were allowed to do, and that could change across culture. The other thing about this binary is it says that there's only two, when the fact of the matter is gender identity is developed in our mind. It's a psychological sense of self. It's in our mind, it's in our hearts, it's in our spiritual development, all these internal parts about what makes us who we are and how we understand ourselves. And we know, and research suggests and supports, that there's more than just a binary. People can identify with regards to their gender in a spectrum, right? It can be both masculine and feminine, and we can choose to express that in these other ways. So when we use terms like non-binary, many times non-binary people maybe identify as neither male or female or man or woman or masculine or feminine. Maybe they identify in a fluid way around maybe both, or it can change in their sense of self and how comfortable they are expressing that outwards. Or maybe it's none of the above. And so that might be times that you hear people choose to use pronouns they, them, or they, theirs, these gender neutral, non-binary terms. So I just said that I'm cisgender. So what cisgender means is that I was assigned female at birth. Many of us, when we're born, there's an assumption, there's a quick decision made based on your external genitalia, oftentimes, of if you're male or female. And then what this gender binary in society says is, well, if you are assigned female at birth, then you're going to act like, look like, and behave like a girl. And there's quotations around all of this. You are going to be feminine and you are going to behave in society and express your gender in a specific way. But gender, again, has nothing to do with this body that we're in many ways, because it is our own intrapersonal psychological development. So for me being cisgender, I was assigned female at birth. And now I don't agree with all these binary rules, but when I developed my sense of self, that being a girl, being a woman identified person aligned with how I was also assigned at birth. So I'm cisgender, and cis actually means just on the same side as, they're all lined up. Now, when we want to talk about our transgender friends, family, and colleagues, for a transgender person, how they were assigned at birth does not align with their internal sense of self and their gender identity. And gender identity can be firmly in place and understood by a child as early as 4 years old. For many people, this might happen in a spectrum. It might be fluid. One's internal understanding and how safe or ready they are to then express that outward in terms of expressions of masculinity or femininity or neither, that can take time. And one of the reasons it takes time usually has less to do with somebody's internal process and more to do with societal expectations, right? The term genderqueer can be used by people that in a number of ways. Maybe somebody who's non-binary likes this term genderqueer or gender fluid. Genderqueer can also be used by somebody who maybe is cisgender and woman identified as cisgender woman, but kind of just breaks that mold, doesn't really fit into these gender expectations. Queer in general can be a tricky word to use. So for my straight allies, one of the suggestions I give is that if you're going to a queer poetry slam, and that's what it says on the poster, then let people know that you're going to the queer poetry slam. But if you're telling people about this amazing Pronouns 101 that Amanda Cole gave with you, and you want to tell them that I'm queer, which is a term that I use in love and embrace, they might not be sure if you're using that in a positive way or if you're using it in a way that's derogatory, because queer is still a word that is not helpful and embracive of our community. And even within the LGBTQ community, some people really love this word like myself and others don't. So you know what I do? I meet people where they are. If somebody tells me that they don't like that term queer and they're not comfortable using it for themselves, then I'm going to pay attention to that and not use it around them. I'm going to lean into saying LGBTQ community. But when I'm in a space where people have a shared understanding about the word queer, I might say the word queer community. I also, as a white person, keep this in mind when I'm meeting somebody and they prefer the term Black over African American, or they prefer African American over Black, because words have context and levels of comfort. We want to believe people for who they say they are and treat them the way that they want to be treated. And then with transition, this is a term that is talking about somebody's gender identity and gender transition, usually the external expression of one's identity. What's important to keep in mind is people know who they are for much longer than they might be telling us. So again, when we're talking about transition, it's the external process or the kind of oftentimes the societal process of aligning how one understands themselves internally with how they want to express that outwardly. That can be fluid and it can change over time. I did forget to mention, it's a lot and I'm talking really fast. Use the chat, activate the chat. Here's what I want you to do. I want you to ask questions, of course, and you can send them just to me if you're not comfortable phrasing it to everybody else. But likely, if you have the question, so does somebody else. The other thing is we're all learners together. I am not an expert. I'm just up here being a little bit more vulnerable with my green light to share some information and things that I've researched and learned along the way. But you might have another way of explaining this or that you've experienced it, and dropping that into the chat is wonderful. So please do that as well. Even if it feels like you're correcting me, I'm not going to have a problem with that. I promise. All right. So I'm going to try and think about this scenario here and think about it for you all who are working with clients, maybe within loans, titles, real estate. And then also for those of us who are having to consider the way in which we use gender inclusive language and avoid making assumptions about people's orientation and gender identity in our workplaces. So a little bit more collegial. So one of the things I want you to kind of think about is, the image that we have up here is kind of looking at the cost of the closet. And it's not to say that we're always in the closet, but this is what can happen for people with regards to their orientation, if they're lesbian, gay, bi, pansexual, etc., or with regards to their gender identity, if they're non-binary or transgender. There's a lot of times that we're just running through a bunch of scenarios and how that affects our productivity, our sense of trust, our willingness to do business with people, or even work on a project. This could also happen in an interview process if you're interviewing people. So small talk is important. You know, if you're working with clients or connecting with other people, that it's a huge way to build relationships and have a connection, a sense of self, right? But small talk, it can also be like 480 in March. It can be full of potholes. We can be driving along, going smoothly for a conversation, and might not even know that we're hitting huge potholes and causing a lot of discomfort for another person. So we're just hanging out. It's Tuesday. What did you do this weekend? And if you've asked me this, I have to run through my mind, you know, have I opened up to this person that I'm a lesbian? And if the answer is yes, well, did you get it? And if you got it and you were cool, you got it, we're totally fine, then nice and easy, my energy is really up. I'm not having to overthink about this interaction. And I tell you, you know, I took my girlfriend. Also, I have a wife, but in this scenario, it's a girlfriend. We took her on a train ride to Philly for her birthday, and I'm sharing all this information, and it's really great. Now, back it up. Did I already come out to you in some way? Did I already maybe talk or share something about my family or myself and you didn't get it? You shut it down or it was awkward? Well, then I'm just going to tell you I went with a friend to Philly. And then you might ask me, oh, well, why did you go to Philly? I'm not going to tell you that it was my girlfriend's birthday. I'm just going to say no special reason. And then I'm going to defer over to you. I've been thinking about this, been having to read body language, been having to remember these interactions, and my energy level is going down. When you want to think about this from the real estate perspective, this is that connection, that spark that we're going to have together as clients, right? I'm going to be reading for your body language. I might have already shared this, or if I haven't, again, this is the extra work that people are doing, okay? If I haven't opened up to you or I'm not comfortable sharing, then I'm trying to figure out, especially in a colleague work setting, what do you know? Have you already made some assumptions? Do you know that I'm with somebody, but you're assuming I'm straight and that their gender is that they're masculine or that they're a man? Have you heard me refer to the term girlfriend, but you're thinking it's just my roommate? So now I'm having to make all these decisions about whether I want to explain this to you or not. You know, how deep do I want to go into this? And you can see that's just like, that's killing our vibe. It's killing our connection, and my productivity is going way low, right? You can also think about this when you're having conversations with people about if they want to have children, what their families look like. We can make a lot of assumptions, right? A lot of people made assumptions of me when I was in my 20s and 30s that I wanted to have more children. But what if I don't want to have children? I don't want to explain that to you. What if I'm trying, but it's difficult? What if we're an LGBTQ family and the adoption process is really daunting? I want to be able to share with you about my family, but if you open up that small talk with some assumptions about identity or ability and whatnot, we're going to shut it down. So how can you open with more open-ended questions, or how can you have conversations? Tell me more about your family. Who lives in your family? If you're looking at a home, what's it going to look like? What family, what friends are going to fill this space? You can ask in a more open-ended way that doesn't assume people's orientation or their gender, right? when we want to think about this around transition, like gender identity and gender expression, is if somebody knows their gender identity and say they're a transgender woman, right? So that means that they were assigned male at birth, and they most likely were even socialized for that first long part of their life and lived as a male identified person outwardly, but internally knew otherwise. And they're starting that transition externally. So when you're asking about the weekend or you're making these conversations, you want to make it open enough that somebody can come in and say, well, actually, this is what I'm doing, or this is what I went through, right? And again, I think about people who are partners with trans identified people. Their life is changing, and so the language is changing, their pronouns are changing, and their family is taking shape. And how open you are might make it so much easier for somebody to bring you in on this. One thing that often we get asked are pronouns only for the LGBTQ community or transgender people? And the fact is, no. Everybody has a sexual orientation. I feel like in the LGBTQ community, we have a lot of language and we talk about it because our existence was literally illegal for years, decades. So we've been pushed out to the margins. When any group is pushed out to the margins, one of the ways to have visibility, to have rights, to have advocacy, to show up and get into the center is we create the language that better defines our experiences and who we are. So everybody has orientation and everybody has gender identity. So everybody has pronouns, right? There are some specific ways that for trans and non-binary people, because there's this interaction with society, there's this pushing back on this gender binary and these rules. And the process of coming into oneself is also then that outward transition, that pronouns and names and even gender expression might change over time, how masculine or feminine somebody appears. And so that's often why we talk about being a cisgender ally, using my pronouns, how it opens up, or where I don't assume somebody's pronouns, that it affects that the non-binary people in our lives and the transgender people specifically. But I always like to use this photo. One reason is when we're talking about the cost of the closet, for anybody who's first starting out in their career, our young professionals, people first coming out of college, or even people over the age of 40 but are making career moves, there is about, for young professionals, we know 41% of the time we go back in the closet. We share less about our life. Maybe we don't come out. Maybe we hide. Maybe we use different language or kind of gender neutral language. So around that time of coming out of college and having to land my first job, I had to negotiate some of that as well. When I was doing my interview, I gave a 20-minute presentation to the board. I went out to a board dinner. I kept on not referring to, at this time, Aaron and I were married, Aaron's gender. And it was a really strange experience. And again, it used up all that productivity. I also used this slide to share, Aaron and I identify exactly the same. We're both cisgender women. We use the term, we're lesbians, and we also use the term queer, and we're white. But we move through the world really differently. Because even though we're both woman identified, Aaron presents in a really masculine manner. Aaron has very short hair and wears masculine clothes, these men's clothes. It doesn't mean that she identifies as a man. This is just how she likes to express her gender. And because she gets more pockets, let's just be real. So what happens when you're selling a home to Aaron and I? On your first look at my wife, you might make the assumption that she identifies as a man, or you might just out of politeness say, how can I help you today, sir? And it's draining on that energy, because then you're going to notice, or she has to correct, and that's going to take away from having a meaningful spark and a meaningful connection of people, right? The way that we express our gender does not give us reliable clues upon which to assume how somebody identifies. You don't have to have long hair or short hair that then matches or determines your gender identity. Anybody can think about this. It's not just for transgender or genderqueer folks like my wife, right? So what we want to do is we want to move into a space, and here we're coming into pronouns. So again, drop those questions. I'm trying to bring us in for a fast landing. We want to get into the space where we avoid assumptions about identity. And one of the ways that we can do that is by adding our pronouns to our signature line, to our Zoom calls, and just sharing our pronouns. I have not been misgendered. People, in my experience, can see my name, read how I present, and they're going to get it right. They're going to get it right that my pronouns are she, her. So why am I introducing myself with my pronouns? It makes it easier for other people. That's what it does. I often share, I was working at Antioch College, and it was just a norm there. And I had this meeting every Tuesday with the same 12 people. I knew these people like the back of my own hand. One Tuesday, one of the students introduced themselves and then used she, her pronouns. The next Tuesday, a week later, they used they, them pronouns. And because we had that built into our communication systems, I was able to just take a note of that. And it was going to be more likely that I wasn't going to misgender this student that I really valued. I didn't want to make their life more difficult, right? Now, did I make mistakes? Sure. Because my memory had locked them in using different pronouns. So I needed to practice. But because we introduce, it's going to make that easier. It's going to make people feel included. Another thing that it does to me when I'm looking on your signature lines or your bios and whatnot, what it tells me is that as an organization or as an individual, you've got an idea that the gender binary is a falsehood, that there's more than just two genders, that you've done some thought or had some training or have some people in your life that are non-binary or trans-identified. So you're showing me your allyship and your awareness, right? You're also going to help that we're going to get it right. And here's the thing to remember. Pronouns and are as important as our names. They're an integral part about how we feel seen, how safe we feel, right? And the fact of the matter is that non-binary and transgender people are at higher rates of every single terrible thing that can happen in the world. Discrimination, being overlooked for raises or promotions, let alone just the danger of violence, because there's such a built-in belief system around this idea of the binary. So let's make our interactions safer and feel more comfortable in the smallest of ways, right? In the smallest of ways, because the risk and the danger for our trans and non-binary people, and even, genderqueer people like Erin, like when people sometimes realize that she's not a man, it's pretty dangerous for us, right? It's pretty dangerous for her to go into public restrooms. So the easier that is, we're just taking care of everybody. Let's see, I'm just looking here a bit at my notes that you can't see. Okay. So there's some things to keep in mind. One thing is, say, I want to know your pronouns because I want to communicate well with you. Well, sharing mine is going to make it more likely that you're going to share yours. I feel pretty comfortable. I took our daughter to get her hair cut the other day, and I said to the person, I said, oh, yeah, can you share your pronouns? And I just feel pretty comfortable in that space. I also felt like we were in an environment where I wasn't going to put the person on the spot. Here's the thing. You got to get kind of comfortable doing that, not kind of. You need to be comfortable and do that in a consistent way, because you can't just hone in on the person that you think looks queer or that you think looks trans, because then you're not helping bring them into the space. You're just honing in on them and the way that they seem different to you. So you want to use this consistently and across the organization in your interactions. We, at our events, we always have pronoun stickers, right? So when you come to a Plexus event, we're going to encourage you to have a pronoun sticker. One of the main things is to keep in mind, humans have evolved to be able to make interactions gain trust pretty quickly. Like it goes all the way back to that lizard brain. But we can learn how to slow down and be more intentional so that we have more efficient communication. So where you're able to make it a norm to have pronoun stickers or wear a pronoun pin, you're just, again, going to make it easier for others to do that and make asking or sharing just feel that much more natural. We don't want to force people to do it for a couple of different reasons. If somebody's really shut down around this and really uncomfortable, it's not going to bring them to a more inclusive standpoint. Frame of mind. But more importantly is that if somebody is in their own process of coming into themselves and in that external transition process, you could be putting a lot of pressure on them. Maybe they've been using she, her pronouns, but they're ready to start using he, him pronouns, masculine pronouns, right? But they're not yet sure how they want to do that. Or maybe they're going to flip-flop for a little bit. Maybe in some places they're going to use the pronouns that actually align with their gender identity, but in other places they're going to flip back to the ones that everybody has been assuming or using for them at other times. So one thing is to be patient with people, right? This does happen in not a linear fashion with most things in life. It's a zigzag. There's a roadmap to get there. But also, if we enforce it, or if we create a system of shame around it, you might be hurting the people that we're trying to make a more inclusive and belonging environment. One thing though, if organizationally, as if you're bringing in new hires, you can just include, can you share your pronouns? You know, we share our pronouns here so that we can have a more inclusive environment and to support good communication. A lot of times, again, this just comes back to good communication. So I'm going to have a few questions here, and then I'm going to stop sharing my screen so I can see you all again, and then open up the floor for you. So if you're unsure of what somebody's pronouns are, don't assume, just avoid assuming. So what I do is until I know your pronouns, I use they, them. They, them is totally neutral. Now, if you've told me your pronouns and I continue to use they, them instead of the pronouns that you've told me, then I'm going to make you feel othered or excluded. But for instance, if I want to know where one of my kids is going, I might say, let me know when you get to their house. Or if I'm looking across the room, I'm like, oh, who is that person? Can you tell me their name? Even just doing that, sometimes we get really stuck on the way that they, them is also a plural. But, oh, can you tell me their name? Totally normal. So that's the way that we can ask, can you tell me your name? Same thing, right? Another way around this is just to, if you were in an environment where you know somebody better and might know their pronouns, you can ask them. And again, I don't hesitate. It's pretty normal for me to ask somebody their pronouns. I always share mine. I say, hey, my pronouns are she, her, and I want to make sure I get your pronouns right. Can you share yours? That's a really good thing. Another thing to keep in mind is have a quick one-line sentence about why you share your pronouns, because some people are going to be like, what are you talking about? Why are you sharing your pronouns? But what I do is to say, well, it's really similar to Mr. and Miss. Remember how we used to do that all the time? So one, I use they, them, because then I just assume everybody's a doctor, right? Until I know how they identify. And so, but you just want to have a way to say that. I just say, it just makes communication more efficient. It means that I'm not going to use the wrong pronouns, and it's going to make for a more trusting interaction with you. So some people want to know, what is offensive? So things that are offensive, that no human being is an it, right? So anything that is it is never okay. Also, if you put the word the in front of people, like, that's not good. It sounds really different when you say the gays, right? Okay, I say it as a joke, but if you're saying like the gays or the lesbians, if you're putting they in front of it, the transgendered or the transgenders, none of that is okay. It's transgender, not transgendered, right? And we want to refer to communities as the community and individuals as they are. So we want to avoid putting the word they in front of it, or the. We were on one of these trainings and somebody shared with me that they were a parent of a non-binary child. And so they were having to tell their colleagues because people were asking about their daughter. And so they were having to say, actually, my child is non-binary. And somebody was really offhanded and said, well, you're whatever you call it. Again, what is that doing? It's diminishing people's humanity. It's not respecting people's awesomeness, right? Here's the last thing. You're going to make mistakes. It's just going to happen. I make mistakes all the time. This can happen for a number of reasons. I mean, it's really deeply coded, these binary rules about who does what. It's like super coded. So if you see somebody that is more feminine, you're maybe going to make an assumption about their gender identity or their pronouns. That's going to happen. I also have had friends that have changed, obviously, have transitioned over time, changed their pronouns and their name. And I just make a mistake. And I sometimes call them by that other other name or those other pronouns. Here's what I observe as being an ally to my wife, Erin. What's best is when somebody just says, thank you for correcting me. I'll do better. Or they just say, oh, right, thank you, and move on. What's worse is when they over apologize, because then we're just like wanting the latte and to like get out of this awkward situation. But that person feels so much remorse and guilt and embarrassment that it just makes for a really bad and awkward situation. I also always like to encourage people, when you're asking about children, you can just use the word child, or kiddo, little one. When I worked at the Museum of Contemporary Art, the museum was really, really good at greeting families and saying, tell me about the grown-ups that are here today, or tell me about the little ones that are here today. Because here's another thing. If you go up to a child and you say, oh, is this your mom or dad? One, you might be misgendering your parents. Two, you might be making assumptions that are based in heterosexism. And three, maybe that's not. Maybe that's their other grown-up that is just as important, but they're being raised by their grandparent, or they're being raised by their aunt and uncle. And you're just kind of bringing that to the forefront in an uncomfortable way when we make those assumptions. So those are just some ways that goes beyond the LGBTQ part of inclusion and just reaching people for where they are, recognizing that families and people are comprised of all different kinds of parts. And we'll make sure that we share this, because this last slide here has a lot of really good resources. I go back again and again to PFLAG. They have wonderful allyship resources, and that's because PFLAG started as a group to support parents of LGBTQ people, and it's evolved over time. It's also a support group and a place of support for LGBT identified folks. So with that, I'm going to stop my share and turn around and see you all. So did we have any questions or anything that came into the chat? Or does anybody want to raise their hand to let us know if you want to ask a question and come off of mute?
I have a question, or not a question, just an observation that happened to me the other day. I teach after school programs using Lego bricks to kids. And I was in a school the other day that I had not been in, and there were like 20 children, and 2 of them were fighting. And the one who was upset had super long curly blonde hair, but was wearing like shorts and a t-shirt, and there was chaos, and one of them bit the other one. And I said, don't bite her. And the child immediately turned around and said, I'm not a her, I'm a him. And I'm so glad I did what you said to do, which was, oh, I'm sorry, don't bite him. Right. You guys need to be nice to each other, and just kind of moved on like it was nothing. And, at the school, schools are so strange these days, and parents, and you don't know what's appropriate to ask. And so I like the idea of referring to the kids by their names or as children. I'm there for one day, and if I open up that question, well, I'm perfectly comfortable with it. You never know if you're going to have a parent who's going to have some issue. So it's a delicate thing there, but I was thinking maybe the best thing to do is an introduction and just say, tell me your name and what you'd like to be called, or how you'd like me to refer to you. To kind of pull it off. Pronoun discussion in case there's, you have people from so many different walks of life, and you're just trying to give the kids a wonderful workshop that they'll enjoy. Yeah. So I'm finding the schools is tricky.
Yeah. So here's one thing. If somebody bites somebody else, like we just say, we don't bite our friends.
Yeah.
Like, we don't bite people, so again, you're just using this like,
yeah.
We don't bite people. We don't bite our friends. Also, another thing that we didn't talk about is when you're greeting folks, you can just say, hello, fine people. Hello, lovely, our lovely students today. And then that way saying, can I have your attention, boys and girls? Or when we're opening up formal events, we don't have to say ladies and gentlemen, because what you do when we do that is we're rolling back into that habit of assuming that there's only 2 gender expressions and gender identities when there's a lovely greater expression of it.
Yeah, it's interesting because we start the class, hello friends, and these are my friends, and we just call them our friends. But it's, when you're so used to slipping into pronouns, you really have to catch yourself. And I was glad that he corrected me. because it made me think, okay, you know, even in a sense of chaos, you have to be aware of this.
Yeah.
So yeah, he taught me a
so
lesson.
this also raises a really good point that as much as we're putting emphasis on using pronouns, there's also times I really encourage you to just take pronouns and gender out of it all the time, as much as you can. I like to share about our son that we never assumed who he might be interested in, or that he was even interested in anybody, right? So we don't want to make assumptions about people's dating life. So we were always so like, who are you interested in? Who are you going to prom with? And then we let him fill in about that person's identity. So much so that when he was 16, he was like, Mom, it's girls. I like girls. I know that trans women are women and trans men are men. And I know that if I want to date somebody of the same gender, that is also okay. But he was like, I'm straight. So I was like, oh, I love this. I think this is great. But so you can just build that in as a habit with and this is a good point that Heidi also brings up. We're talking about this around workplace and around working with clients and whatnot, but this expands so much further than that. Just build it as a really good habit. So you're going to make it easier when somebody else in your family of a younger generation, or maybe of an older generation, is finally able to come out and be who they want to be, who they truly are. Yeah.
Amanda, I love the way that you said that you just assume everybody's a doctor until they tell you otherwise by using the they, them. I had an experience the other day where I was asking a client for the name of their lender so that I could reach out to the lender and start getting paperwork taken care of for closing. And they gave me the name of their lender, which was Sharon. I didn't automatically identify that with male or female. And so my response, and I was talking to someone else who also identifies as queer, my response was, oh, great. Do you know their pronouns so that I can address them properly? And the response from my client was, oh, I've never even asked. I didn't need to know. And it's funny that I thought that I did, because I didn't either. And I giggled and I said, you know what? I don't need to know either. I'm sorry. What's their phone number? Because I love the way you said, assume everyone's a doctor and take the gender out of it, because really there's very few situations where it's necessary for us to know. And if we can kind of remove that assumption from our head and just go with the they, them, and as many opportunities as possible, it really helps normalize the speech.
Yeah, and so you're also raising a couple different things. Just like you can't, just by looking at me, just because you're going to guess it right, it doesn't mean that somebody else could dress exactly like this and identify not with she, her pronouns, not as a woman identified feminine person. That would be totally fine. Mm-hmm. So here's the thing. Names also don't give us reliable clues, right? Especially when we're talking across cultural context. So there's nothing in a name. And this is another thing. Somebody can be named Jeremy and use she, her pronouns. Because a lot of times our expectation is, well, if you want to use those pronouns, then you have to have a name and you have to dress that matches those pronouns. I also need you to let go of those expectations, because it's not our business and it's not necessary, right? So pronouns can get really tricky with names as well. So here's something that I tell people. There is, like, when we're trying to be really formal, we'll often want to use Mr. or Miss or Mrs., right? There is a gender neutral title, I think, or prefix. Gosh, I need to retake my English class. It's MX, and it's said as mix. Now, you need to be ready to explain what that is. So you can go on YouTube and get familiar. But I love it when somebody is trying to be formal and acknowledge me and uses mix, right? Because it's just neutral. But I think that's new in our lexicon. So in the more mainstream setting, that might be confusing to people. So here's what I tell people. If you want to greet me and you want to show politeness, maybe deference, hierarchy, all that polite stuff that we have to do in business relationships, my name is always right. You can't mess up my name. So if you want to be more formal, just say, Dear Amanda Cole, right? I'm going to get it. That dear, using that in that formal kind of letter in that email, it's going to get it for me. Now, I do think that you're right, Jackie, asking somebody to say, oh, do you know their pronouns? Now, somebody else said I didn't think it was appropriate to ask. I was just having a conversation with my brother. He does a lot of the hiring and he's great. He's wonderful. And I was telling him how I do these trainings to help people know how to come out in an interview. And he said, well, why do you have to come out in the interview? And the thing is that we all come out in the interview because we all talk about our personal lives. We all talk about our family, right? And so straight people can take it for granted, and cisgender people can take it for granted that the little nuanced in ways that happens. So I like to encourage people to say it's not invasive, or it's not like something that you didn't need to know. It's naturally going to be something that we're going to share about ourselves, and we want to get it right, and we want to make it easier for someone to open up and share or change over time, because gender expression and identity can change over time. I'm just going to keep on saying that to you all over and over and over. It's a beautiful spectrum. It's why we use the rainbow.
I have a question, and this is more geared towards children. If you have a child who expresses their pronouns to you and you're trying to support them and help them by helping them share that with other family members, and then those other family members maybe don't understand how to respond and say something like, well, maybe they'll grow out of it. What's a good response in those situations?
Yeah, and I'd like to hear from other people too. So one thing I usually do with our kids, because we've had to bolster our kids that like being a lesbian household, a same gender loving household, that like our kids are going to hear people challenge that. So I usually like to tell people, like children, I need you to be ready that sometimes the world is a hard place, and sometimes the people that we love and that are close to us, they're not going to totally understand who we are. Like that's going to happen, and that has nothing to do with how important and how special you are to me. And I'm sorry that that might not make you feel good. You can always come talk to me, and you can talk to so and so and so and so and so and so. So I always like to remind them, even outside of their parental relationship with me, who that auntie, who that uncle, who that other grown up, to be gender neutral, who the other grown up is. For now, family relationships are tricky, right? And so you're going to have to make all these kinds of different decisions about how much you're going to go over there. So it matters. I would say it doesn't matter if you think they're going to grow out of it. This is what they're telling us they are. This is the pronouns they want us to use, and you're not going to call them by the wrong name. So I need you to respect them, because respecting them is the same as respecting me, right? You can say things like, I know that this might be hard for you. I'm asking you when we're here to do the best that you can, right? And then if there still is pushback, you can draw your lines and boundaries to say, I'm sorry, we're not going to come over for that birthday party because I think it's going to be more stressful for us than it needs to be. I don't think that this is going to be good for my kid. And I know that you want to have a relationship with them, so I'm going to need you to figure this out. Like, however that might sound. Now, that's like a super easier said than done kind of thing. And the other part about this is, when we're thinking about allyship, who are your allies in the room? Who's somebody else that could have that conversation because maybe they'll believe them? You know what I mean? Like my brother Joshua, he can say whatever. It's the same thing I said, and everybody believes him more than me, right? Like these are our family dynamics. So you can also think about this in workplaces too. So maybe there's a higher level manager or decision maker, and they're not hearing it from you. Is there somebody else that can kind of break it down for them, give them the buy-in and the validity in that way? Yep. And Melvin's talking about going home and practicing. And I also want to encourage people that if you know you're going to make mistakes with somebody, you just keep on fumbling the ball, just practice it, right? And maybe even put it on note cards, put a sticker on your computer if you're having a computer meeting. Like I have a sticker that says no swearing. That's what I need to remind myself of every day. But maybe you need to remember to introduce yourself with your pronouns. So you put a sticky there. Maybe you need to remember that. I also like to think about this for myself as a white person and an English only speaking person. There are some names and words that don't come easy to me. It's my responsibility to practice. You know, I can only expect that other person to correct me on the pronunciation of their name so many times before their batteries are going to deplete, before we're just not going to have that good rapport and trust. And also I'm going to be making them feel like they don't belong. So I have to practice it.
I have a question, Amanda.
Yeah.
And you might have already answered this at some capacity, but so we have a coworker on our team who goes by they, them, but they're just not somebody who really likes to, it's out there, but they're not going to be that person that will correct people. And so what do you do in a situation, for example, I had a teammate, I kept referring to my coworker, they, them, and they're like, they, what do you mean they? Is like, it's one person. I'm like, no, they use the pronouns they, them, and I'm respecting that. Like, do I just keep kind of pushing that needle and like, you know, using that language when somebody else is not using their correct pronouns?
Yep. So it matters in your situation. And again, this expands to other areas of allyship as well. So I think you're doing the right thing. Depending on your relationship with this other person, you can say, here's a way that I found it useful to understand how to use they, them for a singular person. And you can, again, YouTube, Decoded, there's a mypronouns.org that explains it. Webster Dictionary said this, that's A-okay. So you might want to say, I know that it might take some getting used to, here's how I did it. In general, also, when we're trying to bring people along with our allyship and to get it, make yourself vulnerable. So I literally make mistakes. So when I tell you I make mistakes, is that going to make it easier for you to figure it out? Now, if it's happening around this person, where somebody's being misgendered, just correcting, putting an emphasis on the word, actually, Kristen uses they, or they are going to get you the report. So you can just use it in that way. But you want to read it because you also don't want to put that person totally on blast. So it could be, and this is especially true when people are maybe using masculine pronouns for somebody who's feminine, or feminine pronouns for somebody who's masculine. Like, again, the example I shared of my wife, who I totally have her consent to do this, right? As an ally, which is an important part. Do you have consent to share that information about that person, or to share their experience? So think about that. You will want to recorrect or say, I know that they use these pronouns. I know that Kristen uses whatever pronouns. And you can do that in a group setting, and you want to also keep it moving. You want to be mindful of the person that is being misgendered and what they need in that sense. And then also you can pull that person aside. You can send an email and just say, hey, I noticed that you're using the wrong pronouns for this person. I'm happy to talk with you about it, but I know that it's not going to make them feel good. I want to help you get it right. Those are some ways that you can do it.
Erin just dropped a really nice, oh, sorry, I was going to say, Erin just dropped a really nice link in the chat, guys. A lot of people, y'all, I just gendered all of us, didn't I? Anyways, that link that's in the chat is a great link to add to your email signature. If you're adding pronouns to your email signature and you're getting some questions about it, you can add a little, why do I use pronouns, with a link to this information, and it'll give someone a little bit of information about why you have that on your email signature. Or just open up the conversation so that you can engage with someone and talk to them about why you're an ally and some of the things you learned today.
Yeah. And another way that's really easy is, like, a lot of us know people who are divorced or who have changed their names for any number of reasons. We already do this in society. So I like to remind people that no way ever in your life would you call my mother Christine Williamson and live, right? Because that's not her name. Okay. So you're not going to do that. So it's the same thing. People change their names. Or you're not going to call me Mandy. My dad's family is, but you're not. That would be awkward. Why would you insist on calling me Mandy when I clearly go by Amanda? Same thing. So also giving people examples that make it easier, because there is a lot of pushback around gender identity. I think we've made a lot of progress with somebody understanding and respecting that I'm a lesbian and that that's okay. Gender identity is still really tricky, and we still have issues of discrimination and polarization even within the LGBTQ community. I just think these gender binaries, these rules, you're talking about Legos, Heidi. Why do we have to have pink only Legos? We gender things in order to make more money, to put a sales tax on it. It's really, really, really deep. So that could be some of the reasons that people have a hard time, because it's kind of the next frontier with inclusion in my mind.
Can I just add, it's interesting because I think of children today and how they're learning, and I just keep sitting here thinking about my 8th grade English class, and how when you were writing something, you would use they when it wasn't directed at a male or female, and you would always get corrected. It's he or he, she, or he or she. Like, you're so taught you can only use they for plural. I remember getting corrected on that on papers, like seeing the red marks. And as a child, my instinct was, well, I don't know the gender I'm writing to, so I'm going to use something that doesn't. And at that time, growing up in the 70s, it was kind of taken away. Well, then just use he. you know, everything defaults to he. And it's really beautiful to see that we don't default anymore, male or female, that we default to just this as a human. And it's neat to watch my niece, who's 14, is so aware of this, and it's so easy for her. And it hasn't been drummed in her the way it was drummed in me as a young teenager learning grammar and that. And it's really neat to see the way the world is moving. And, you know, who our leaders are gonna, it's gonna be so much more natural for them to use pronouns correctly and freely. I still picture this 8th grade teacher every time I use they. I picture her in my face. So.
And I think just to close, I know that we're over time. The next thing, so we did not get into how to think about your forms, your intake forms, and where there needs to be some standardization that just hasn't changed yet. You know, all this kind of stuff. If you can add a pronoun option, benefits, whatever. But if you have just Word documents that you're using, they are easy to change documents. Find the ways that you can take gender out of them. So Plexus just updated our bylaws. We did a search find. We found all the he/she's because he/she is not inclusive. That was a movement. That was a step towards not assuming masculine, you know, like kind of the patriarchy stuff, right? We won't get into that. So we had to do a search find and we changed it today. So where can you take gender out of it and where can you bring gender in to be more inclusive on those forms and stuff? But I know that we need to go. If you did not register online and get our registration link, drop your email in here so we can make sure we send you our slides and all these useful links that we've put in there. And we should probably stop recording. There we go.